So I'm in the process of watching the latest episode of Surrounded by Jubilee. And if you're not familiar with the format, it's where they take one person with a set of propositional claims and they surround them with a various collection of opponents of what is supposed to be the diametric opposite presuppositions. And the latest episode of it features Jordan Peterson under the presupposition that he is a Christian versus 20 atheists. And I have a host of issues with this. And the first of which is that every single time that Jordan Peterson has been confronted or been put on the spot on the question of whether or not he is religious or a Christian, he evades it. He is and under the guise of that he's just keeping that question private to himself. And I have a serious problem with that, because that is not what it means to be a Christian. There are certain circumstances in which a person's private faith do need to be separated from their work. And I think that that's kind of his idea here, that he is trying to keep his personal identification separate from his work as, let's say, a psychologist or a pontificate or whatever it is that he happens to be. But we also can't deny how important it is to understand a person's perspective, to understand what their beliefs are. And I'll use another example of a person that has been featured in this specific, let's say, program, whatever it is, this form of content. Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh have both been featured. Both are very publicly Roman Catholic. Charlie Kirk, as well, being a Protestant, has been featured here. And they are very upfront. They are very explicit. They're very opaque about this, that they are, in fact, religious, practicing Christians. However, they will also say that a lot of their political beliefs and things, they can be defended from a non-religious perspective using scientific insight or philosophical argumentation. I just have a serious issue, and I think that this actually comes from a sort of disciplement mentality of Jordan Peterson spending his time with Dennis Prager, who is a ordained rabbi of the Jewish faith. And this comes through in a lot of the things that Jordan Peterson has to say about Christianity and about the Christian influence on the world, and the way that he specifically will define all of those subjects. Throughout this conversation, as well as various other conversations he's had in this specific genre realm, he will say that God is the unifying conscience, or the unifying definition of reality, or that God is all these sort of symbolic, or that God is all of these different pseudo-social or pseudo-psychological aspects of the human experience, rather than God being the triune being that rules and controls and created all of matter. This is important because it basically sets Jordan Peterson into a category of pseudo-Greco-Roman philosophical stoicism, that he's not necessarily espousing real Christian belief. And that, in fact, the early Christians, talking about the first 3 centuries of Christendom, wrestled really heavily with who is God and how do we define God. And there's a host of debates that took place about this that involved various heresies being described by Arius and Sabellius, and that trying to describe God as an impersonal force, as just all sorts of things that ended up being pushed out to the margins, that whereas through the process of creeds and councils, stronger definitions of what Christians believe were put into place. A lot of that was done through but he's not like that. He's not just the illusion. He's not just a separated spiritual force guiding creation. He's not just these things. He's actually something more. And so you go to the Nicene Creed, for example. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, etc. These things were formulated for the purpose of giving Christians a concrete definition of who God is, who Christ is, what we believe Christ has done, who the Holy Spirit is. And while it is true that sometimes these are difficult to fully articulate, that these things are difficult to fully comprehend and understand, what I am saying is that the things that Jordan Peterson articulates are either directly incompatible with those definitions or are actually word salad expositions of declared and defined heresies that those definitions intentionally tried to expel from the Christian community. In other words, after having sat here for over an hour, the thing is 90 minutes, essentially. Having sat here and listened to Jordan Peterson talk for just about an hour, not the whole thing yet, I am no closer to understanding what his understanding of God is than I was at the beginning, nor at the beginning considering all the other things that I've heard him say in the past. That's a problem. It should not be that difficult to ascertain what a person's beliefs are, and especially given that the first prompt that he brings here is the idea that atheists reject God, but they don't actually understand what they're rejecting. And I think that in part comes from the fact that whereas there are many atheists that are articulate and descriptive in their rejection of especially the Judeo-Christian Yahweh, that the actual defined Christian God doesn't fit this weird amorphous assembly that Jordan Peterson has internalized. And so they don't, and I'll reword this here in a second, is that they reject God, but they don't understand what Jordan Peterson believes God is. And that actually probably is true, because I wonder if Jordan Peterson even understands what he himself believes God is. And so what I'm saying is that I am not very confident in affirming that, in fact, Jordan Peterson is a Christian. I don't know if I would really be comfortable affirming that, despite how much that I've heard him talk about it, because of the fact that nothing he says fits into any of the recognized creeds or statements of faith of Orthodox Christianity. Does that mean that he's not a Christian? No. What that does mean is that I don't know where he stands. I would not feel confident as far as if there is somebody here that's curious about Christianity, that watches this video, this conversation, to see if they are interested in pursuing Christianity. If they were to internalize whatever it is that Jordan Peterson believes, I don't think that that would lead them to becoming any closer to being a Christian than where they were when they started. And so to sum up, there's a few things that I can say with perfect clarity here, is that number one, it shouldn't be that hard to figure out what a person believes. It just shouldn't. On the one hand, if a person is in a journey where they're developing their theology and their language for describing that, that's one thing, and maybe that's just what it is. We're seeing him in process. He hasn't arrived anywhere yet. But it shouldn't be that difficult. A person who is day one given their heart to Christ, is committed their life to following Christ, can usually at the very least articulate that much, even if they don't necessarily understand things that are really complex in Christianity, like the Trinity or the hypostatic union or some of the more complicated aspects of Christianity. Even if they can't articulate those things, they should usually be able to say, I'm trying to follow Christ, something along that line. And that bare minimum standard is something that Jordan Peterson seems to go out of his way to avoid in nearly every circumstance. And that's a red flag. As a result, I have more than a minor issue with the idea that he has been set up as a representative of a faith that I really just don't think that he truly understands, or that he truly has the capacity to represent. And this is emblemized by a lot of this hyper-spiritualization, hyper-metaphorization, which, as I mentioned, I think comes from kind of the Jewish inculcation, because modern Judaism, modern Reformed Judaism, tends to hyper-spiritualize and hyper-metaphorize a lot of things, especially in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, in order for them to continue practicing in spite of there being no temple through which to sacrifice. And that even if there was a temple, do you really think in the modern age that there would be the river of blood flowing down out of the Temple Mount like there once was? I highly doubt it. There would be crowds of PETA and ALF protesters there every day, because that's how the temple functioned, that there was a constant flow of blood, of lambs, goats, turtle doves, for the purpose of atonement of sin. And so even if there was a temple, we cannot reasonably pretend that the Jewish people that live there would still be practicing those things, because of the fact that they would not. Because our society around us wouldn't allow them to. Our society wouldn't allow them to do that any more than society permits things like female genital mutilation, or that our society permits the enslavement of other humans, any more than our society permits things of that nature that have gone along with a lot of, let's say, archaic religious practices. Furthermore, the fact that traditional or Orthodox Judaism is so heavily, the only word I can say is corrupted, by modern sensibilities, of that in the Middle East, there's only one nation that holds gay pride parades, and that is Israel. And in fact, this is one of the reasons that they are so heavily criticized by surrounding Muslim nations, because Muslim nations obviously do not permit that sort of thing. That, in fact, surveys consistently review that that the nation of Israel, despite being the Jewish state in practice, is also typically and consistently finding that it is really primarily atheistic, and that the Jewish quarters of New York City are politically as well as identifiably atheist in nearly every circumstance, except for the fact that they do consistently attend synagogue on a regular basis. that there is this interesting interlacing of ritual Jewish practice and philosophical atheism alive in in the Jewish culture, and that I think that actually has discipled Jordan Peterson through his association with Dennis Prager and the conservative political voices that are in that circle. That what I'm getting at is, I think Jordan Peterson has been accidentally discipled in far more atheistic approaches to religious practice than he realizes. So to flip this on its head a little bit, that first prompt that Jordan Peterson presents in this video of that atheists reject God, but they don't understand the God they are rejecting, I'd say that Jordan Peterson presents God, but he doesn't actually understand the God he is trying to present.